Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the December 20th, 2021 meeting of the Board of Education's Budget and Facilities Committee. Today I apologize that we got started a little bit late. We were having some technical issues getting started, but finally here we are. We have a very dense committee meeting today. We have some old business items to cover. Sorry about that. We have some old business items to cover and some new business items to cover. So in the interest of time, I'm going to jump right into it. So the first item that we're going to pick up on is at our previous meeting, we had seen a presentation from our architect, John Grillo Architects, who had shown us a proposal for a 5-year plan. And our action item coming out of that meeting had been to see that broken out in a way that might be more digestible for the board. So Mrs. O'Hara, if you don't mind, I will give you the floor to talk about those breakouts. I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. Sure. So I will share my screen. Can everybody see this? Yes?
Yes,
okay.
Perfect.
So what we've done is we've taken the report and we've broken it into non-univent items, because last session we had a big discussion about air conditioning and the univents. So we thought it would be helpful, because that was such a large chunk of everything, to put that in its own section and then focus on different things that we might be able to cover in our transfer to capital. With the roofs being the most important aspect. And we do have a separate discussion item for the roofs once we get into the budget priorities. So Jim Restano, if you wanted to jump in and add anything, also let me know. So this first page is any kind of ventilation issues. So in all of the buildings, we felt that there was a big priority to make sure that the rooms were properly ventilated, or additional ventilation, not to say that they're not properly ventilated. So Jim, would you like to take us through this, and then I'll go on to the other tabs?
Yeah, what we did, from our last meeting, we did a walkthrough, and this is the culmination of what we found for ventilation, and I believe this is air conditioning too, right, Kathy?
Yes, it's on another tab. So this is the non-univent items.
Right.
We have the track resurfacing,
Okay.
and we've numbered them all priority, 1, 2, or 3. We have the high school roof replacement. We have a new generator for the high school, which is more of a 2 priority. The tennis court replacement, the running track reconstruction, the parking lot reconstruction, which is tied to the tennis repair.
I just want to add there was 2 pieces for the running track. One was a repair and one was a total reconstruction. Am I right, Kathy?
Yes.
And
yeah.
the repair was number 1, I believe.
Correct.
Okay.
And so then we have the AC is broken out. This is the repair and replacement of the UV heating and cooling. That would be about 36 million. And in order to start doing the AC and univent replacement, there would be electrical service upgrades that are necessary at all 7 buildings. And those would cost about 3.6 million. And then this is just the ventilation, which we discussed.
Can you go back to the electrical for a second?
Sure.
Sorry. So this would give us what we need for for the full AC project for the entire district, Jim?
Yes, this was broken out this way because without this we can't go forward with the other upgrade. Right. So in order to have the other buildings, all the buildings ready, we would have to do this first, and then as we go along, we choose which building either all the buildings at once or one building at a time, or however you decide to do it. And
Got
it
it.
would be ready at that point. So there would be no question of the infrastructure being ready for the upgrades.
But this doesn't include bringing power like to the classrooms, right? This is just kind of having adequate power to the switchgear and upping all of that, basically.
Correct. And then within the project, it depends on how it's designed. We would bring panels for the newer compressors. That's what I understand.
Okay, and that's built into those ventilation projects, though, that part of it, presumably.
I would presumably, yes. That's what. Yeah. In other words, at the end of the road, we will have everything we need to get this accomplished within the numbers we are showing.
Got it. Okay, thanks, Julie.
Yeah, I just want to understand order of operations, and you kind of started to hint at it, so I just want to make sure I'm understanding. So the electrical upgrades have to be done first and foremost before air conditioning units, and that's, I think, the 36 million, however we want to do it. But am I to also understand that before we can do the priority one ventilation items that you have listed, where it says there are 30 rooms in a building, and Sue said there's 15 rooms, and at Daily there are 11 rooms, that we would first still also have to do these electrical upgrades, correct? So these are really the super priority one, and the ventilation items listed as priority one cannot happen until the electrical items happen. Is that correct?
Julie, again, I have to dig a little more into that. That's a very good question. And I saw that myself. It did. And I was going to caution everyone that it did look a little, gray. And I didn't want to, but I'm glad you brought that up. I didn't want, that spreadsheet to look like we're in a situation where we're not ventilating the rooms right now. These are upgrades. So we're speaking of upgrades at this time, not where we're in dire need. There are some areas that need a little more than others, but it's just, I don't want to, we didn't want to project that we're in really bad shape at this time, but it goes hand in hand. The electrical goes hand in hand, and the ventilation goes hand in hand with air conditioning. And that is the major upgrade that will be happening in the district, the air conditioning and ventilation, which would go hand in hand.
Yeah. Jim, can I ask you, when you're thinking about these electrical upgrades, and I don't want to go too off topic, are you also thinking about other needs like charging of one-to-one devices and things like that? I'm under the impression that like classrooms are short on outlets to charge Chromebooks, things like that. Are you thinking kind of like holistically about if we have the power needs that we need for everything when we upgrade? Or maybe that's not a real thing, but I'd heard that anecdotally.
At this point, we're looking at the air conditioning.
Okay.
So not, wasn't focusing on the charging stations like you're saying.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go out on a limb and say that is a very minor draw on the infrastructure compared to adding air conditioning compressors.
No, I understand that. And I didn't mean to suggest specifically about the chart. I was trying to say when we're thinking about upgrading the electrical, we should kind of think about if there's other needs that we're going to have. And we're doing, I just want to make sure that if we do it, we cover everything, and maybe adding in some factor, or, it's always cheaper to do it all at once than twice.
And again, there's a thing called scope creep. I'm sure you're
right. You're well aware.
Well aware of scope creep. So when we do projects, it is a good idea to get everything in the scope, so you don't have these afterthoughts which eat out the budget and have a problem. But that is a very good suggestion. And when we're doing an upgrade, there shouldn't be a reason why we can't, because we're going to be touching every classroom almost, not to add a couple of things for that reason. And that would be a very good upgrade to the classroom as well.
Dr. Block, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just building on your question. What it sounds like is if there is not now, then there will be going forward sufficient power to power all of the laptops. It's just a question of having outlets, but really outlets can be managed by, power strips.
To a certain extent.
Well, if there's sufficient, if there's sufficient
Correct.
power.
Yes,
We've just had experiences where we've gotten notes from the teacher saying, make sure your kids are charging them overnight, which means that a couple of kids are not going to be able to use it because they didn't charge it overnight. And that seems like something that would be important to fix, but it sounds like there's plenty of power in the room.
there will be.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think he's saying that. He's not saying that there is. He's just saying it might be an easier fix. But it's just something to think about. If we're going to be one-to-one, we should have the ability to charge all the devices in all the classrooms, or at least know what it would take to get to that point. But sorry to digress from the AC presentation.
So if there are other questions, we kind of covered a lot of this when we had John Grillo here. So now it's really just broken out as you've requested. Are there any specific questions?
Do you have like a tied together sheet showing what all of these are, or maybe we can make one and post it, like, what the totals are by priority?
Sure. Yes, I can do that. I don't have it here, but I can
Okay.
put it together.
Yeah. Julie, go ahead.
If I might be asking this too ahead of our schedule, but just because we have this document in front of us. So if we need to postpone this question, that's fine. I appreciate the ventilation and the electrical conversation, but in this 5-year plan, it also has other priority 1 items, which Kathy, I know we're going to talk about the roofs you mentioned. You brought up the track resurfacing. I think there's some masonry work that needs to be done at Daly. As we're looking forward into our upcoming budget planning, are these priority 1 issues going to be incorporated into the budget, or not all of them can be incorporated? How are we breaking out those priorities? And again, if this is a conversation for later, we can postpone it. I just have the document in front of me right now.
Julie, that's a really good segue into, I think, the first new business item, which is budget priorities. Can you open that topic with that question?
Certainly.
Would that be okay? Because that's actually, I think, exactly what we had planned to talk about. Okay. So I think the next topic is the playgrounds. And I believe, Mr. Rostano, you had something you wanted to update us as well.
Yes, let me see if I can open this. Oh, what happened here? There we go. Oh, where are we? Okay, before I share, I did, again, I went back since our last meeting with all the pictures and everything. I went back and was able to get some pricing on an average set for each room, each playground, which one should be gone first and down in a couple of years. So I'll share a spreadsheet that I made here. Everybody can see this? Yes?
Yes, we can see.
So by building, I have the pieces, and I'm calling some of them large pieces or medium pieces because I don't know what they're called. So, and if you notice down in the end priority, I have 1 to 3. I'm using 21 years as a time because it seems that that's the amount of longevity that we're getting out of these playgrounds while they're being maintained. So if you look, I mean, the numbers, the numbers are pretty big. If we look at, say here, the Sousa swing set, it's priority 3. And we could probably get 2 more years out of it. But again, since I wrote this spreadsheet, we did find that we're looking for some parts for that, so that this number might change. And then there's a fire truck, and there's a large set. There's 3 large sets that are in 1, 2, and 3 priority. So you can see, and these are over 21 years old. And if you go down to Guggenheim, we have a large set there that is becoming obsolete in year 2. and so on. So this is what I came up with. This is my opinion. This is not necessarily, it might not necessarily be the opinion of others, but this is what I've gathered just from my experience here in Port Washington. So if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
I'll start and we'll see if else has questions. Kathy, were you able to confirm that you cannot put playgrounds and transfer to capital?
Actually, you can put it in the transfer to capital.
Okay.
So you could,
But
the thing is, it's not eatable. You won't receive building aid on it. So
got it.
that's why schools tend to leave it in the general fund, but you can actually do a budget to transfer.
Okay. So that if we needed to, can you go back down, Mr. Rossano, to the bottom there, to that, that there. Obviously, if this was something that we were going to look at, I think the way to think about it, obviously we can't have 1 year of 100,000 and 1 year of 500,000. So like if we were going to think about it, we would have to try to put it on some, we'd have to come up with some way to kind of have a consistent spend each year. And maybe that would mean 1 year we don't replace anything and the next year we would replace something big. But I wonder, Mrs. O'Hara, if there's a way to maybe I don't know, maybe it's a reserve, like how would be a way to approach this to kind of have like a rolling fund of being able to, replace playground equipment kind of on a consistent basis as it cycles?
Sure.
How would that be approached?
You could have a capital reserve, which the voters would have to approve. You could call it a playground capital repair reserve. However, if you set up that reserve when you actually want to spend it, you again have to go back to the voters and ask for permission to spend the funds. So it can take a little bit of time, and also you have to put it out to vote. So sometimes that can be a challenge.
And if not that, then it would have to be either the transfer to capital or the general fund.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And see, in the past, I believe the sets were placed by the school district, and we only had a limited amount of money that could be spent. So I guess that's why the HSAs would raise money to actually put in things, because the general fund couldn't fund that.
Right. Okay. So I think this is something we'll have to kind of take back and look at holistically with everything else. But I think Ms. Epstein had okay. President Bays, go ahead.
I just have a question. So Jim, when you put in these costs, are these costs based on what is currently on the property now? So for instance, I know that at Sousa, they have a fire truck. I do not believe that Salem or Manor Haven or Daly have a fire truck. So these costs are based on what's currently there. Is that correct?
That's correct, Emily. And again, I'd like to add to that. Some schools have more property and more equipment. So Sousa probably has the biggest playground area than other schools. They have more equipment than others. So thus you'll have more to be replaced. If down the road, while we're doing this type of work, if you'd want to start making a standard for each building, that would be another way. This way budgeting in the future could be a little less cumbersome, where you'd know each building would have a certain amount of play structures.
Exactly my point, because as our goals, the school district, the district goals and the board goals have been one of consistency going across.
It's standard.
Right. So maybe what we should be looking at, and something that maybe should be considered by the committee to recommend to the board, is that if you want the school district to take on the playgrounds, as opposed to relying on HSAs to fundraise for what we need to then put in a kind of, well, this is what can be at all playgrounds, and this is the general cost, and we're going to stick to it. So there won't be any upgrades. Because in the past,
Right.
what I believe has happened is we've had upgrades from the HSAs, not necessarily,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So we've had the upgrades have been done by the HSA. So if the district is trying to say, or if the board, if this board is saying, we don't want upgrades, we want everybody to be the same, and we want it to be only done by the school district, then we should make that recommendation.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, Emily. I was actually thinking the same thing. That was gonna be my next question when I came around, but to your point, like Sousa is showing 2 large sets there, and I'm not sure that Salem even has 2 large sets. So certainly, if this is something that the board was going to attack, we would have to come up with a standard of what the district provides. I, for one, as one board member, I wouldn't have an issue with upgrades, but I think it would be that the district could say, hey, this piece of equipment is coming up in cycle. This school is entitled to 1 piece of medium equipment for X dollars. HSA, if that's what we're putting, if you want more than that, you have 6 months to tell us how much you're contributing.
But that's what we've been doing, though. This is what I'm confused.
Not really,
So
Emily, informally though. Not
formally, because we have
Right.
a budget line. We do have a budget line that Jim has got. I think it's $50,000, right, Jim? That is towards
Emily,
playground.
that's something totally different, because that's what we talked about at the last meeting. That's for like repairing a plank or a bolt when it comes out. What we're talking about is a real capital plan to be able to replace an entire piece of equipment. But then the HSA could still come in and say, we can say, hey, we're doing this. And they might say, no, we want to do something even better. So we'll add another 50 grand on top of your 50 grand. For example, Guggenheim just had a piece of equipment replaced for, what was it, Ms. O'Hara, $30,000. Maybe the HSA could have come up with another 30 and gotten a $60,000 piece, for example.
Again, this will come into another, let's have this conversation,
Yeah.
because then you have a whole equity discussion.
Yeah. So I think, again, that's not for here. Go ahead, Julie.
That's my only point, is once we start going into that, it becomes even more of an equity conversation, right? So I think if this is a direction that this board wants to go in, I do appreciate the idea of looking at a standard for each building and having consistency. But then again, I think we have to balance that standard with the equitability of it all, as well as if we are going to HSAs to ask for money and saying you can upgrade, we have to look at equity as well.
Julie, I just want to add one thing to that. As much as some schools, some elementary schools have a different enrollment number also. So there's a lot of factors to put into that. So it's enrollment, it's standardization or equity, however you want, whatever word you want to use. I like to use the word, standards. I work with standards all the time with each building. So those are the things that there's a lot of factors besides just money and HSA, and it's the enrollment that has to take.
So can I make a suggestion? Emily, I suggest that at some point the board should discuss in a board meeting if we want to. We can come to the greater board in a board meeting, update them on what we've heard in these last 2 weeks or these last 2 meetings. If the board wants to proceed with either a study of, what I guess we need to know how the board sits on this and decide they want to move ahead with. And if they do, we may come back to Mr. Restano and ask him to come up with a standard and a formula of, tying all those factors together that he just talked about. And
exactly. So January 11th, when you come back and report, that's exactly the point. Exactly.
Okay. So Emily, sorry, Julie, I'm going to move on to the next topic unless you had something on this. I see you have your hand
I was
raised.
just going to say, well, Adam, do you want to first take a sense of this committee? Is it our recommendation that we should be spending our time as this committee? And then we would make the recommendation to the board to say, as a committee, right, we want to look more into this and this is a priority.
Good idea.
Right?
So let's just do it. I'm going to take a sense of the committee then, which is myself, you, and Dr. Block. I think it's worthwhile to bring this to the board. That's my opinion. So I'll go to Adam Block.
Sure. I mean, it seems to me that the right way to handle this is to have money that we can tap into for every 21 years when one of these major pieces of equipment needs to be replaced. I think that is the responsibility of the district, and agree that the HSA should have an opportunity to potentially supplement that if they choose to. How to do it, I'm not quite sure about, and it sounds like we're not quite sure about, so I support continuing to move this forward.
So I'm going to put you as a yes. You think it's worthwhile to continue looking into this?
Yes, I think it's
Yeah.
worthwhile to continue.
Okay. Ms. Epstein?
I think we can continue looking into it. I don't know if this year is the priority year that we should make this as our focus conversation. So that would be my only, I guess I'm somewhat of a no in a priority, but I'm losing in this one, so I'm not the majority. So you should bring it as a recommendation.
Okay. Great.
And I'm not sure that I disagree about the level of priority of it, but the direction I think is right. And to me, if we can handle doing multiple things at one time, I see no reason to, because I hear this issue over and over the 4 or 5 years I've been in the district.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll add it to the committee report. Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Asano. This is really helpful and exactly what I was looking for. So appreciate it. Do you mind turning off your share? Oh, great. Okay. So the next item of old business was transportation operations. This we had skipped last week. Mrs. O'Hara, I'm going to give you the floor for this one. What we wanted to talk about here was an update. You had sent a memo to the board, and we wanted you to bring that up publicly, so that the board decided we would talk about this here at the committee level. We also wanted to get an update just generally on transportation operations and how things are going with that.
Sure. So earlier in the year, we discussed an app, Here Comes the Bus app. Robin Allen, our Director of Transportation, she works very closely with Mark Glass. He's our computer coordinator. With Pierce's routing system, TransFinder, there actually has to be a significant upgrade that has to take place in order to do that, which would cost about $17,000. Currently, the district pays $3,500 a year for TransFinder. So our suggestion was to push this off to next year so that we can properly budget for it, because the transportation budget this year, CPI was much higher than was planned. So the transportation budget is very strained right now. Also, it's strained because of the shortage of drivers, and it's very difficult to cover a lot of the routes that we need to be covering. So that was our recommendation.
Okay. So I see Ms. Epstein, you have your hand raised. I guess, do you want to just take a sense of the committee if we want to kind of just table this here and not, I'm thinking that that's the right answer, and we should just tell the board that we're not going to recommend this one for this year.
I'm okay with that. I just was curious, Kathy, is this upgrade, is it aidable through transportation or no?
No.
It's an additional expense. So, okay.
Right. Just the routes really are for us anyway.
So are you thinking that you would have, are we going to be talking about that in the budget? Are you going to plan to include that in the 22-23 budget?
Yes, that's correct. And we figured over the summer, they already understand what needs to be done, Mark Glass. So I think we'll be able to do it much quicker over the summer because they have spent so much time trying to put it into place. We still are having issues with our transportation because there's such a shortage of drivers that if someone calls in sick, Pierce has been working very closely with the district trying to get the coverage. We have our own transportation guys picking up routes, but it's been very difficult. And I know it's been an issue for some families, and we really appreciate everybody's patience. we wish there was something we could do. In the budget, we are going to be discussing possibly adding the purchase of a bus, because we do like the smaller buses for the smaller routes. That would be very helpful for the district, and I think it would save a significant amount of money.
Are you still seeing significant, I guess, delays and operational issues that we were talking about earlier in the year? I guess is question one, and question two is, do you feel that we at least have it under control in terms of like notifications and timely heads up to families that the bus is going to be late that day? And I guess that's really all we can control.
Right. We do have to work on the timeliness of because what's happening is sometimes we don't get notification from the driver, that they're not there. So we are working on making the communication more timely.
Okay. So maybe that's something that we can update on in a future meeting, is if there's any progress on that. Because I think as a district, the timely notification is the only thing that is really something we can control at this point.
Correct.
Given, yeah. Dr. Block or Ms. Epstein, you want to move on to the next one?
Yes.
Okay. So we have on this under old business ARP funds. This is a follow-up to something that we had spoken about earlier in the year regarding Mrs. O'Hara, if you recall, you had told us at, I think, the first meeting when you had updated us with the ARP spreadsheet of how the funds were being spent, that they were generally accounted for, for the entirety of the, I think it was 3 years of spending. What we were hoping to get today was an update on, and maybe we're not going to get the update today, but we wanted to kind of talk about how we look at it is, how are we assessing how those funds were spent in the first year? And do we want to think about any changes in the second year based on what we learned in the first year? Meaning that we shouldn't just assume that because we had allocated it a certain way on day one, that continues to be the correct allocation moving forward. And that was, and really, I guess the question is, what did we learn from the first year? And do we want to consider any changes for years 2 and 3? That's the question.
So that is a good question, and I don't know that we can answer it right now. It's a discussion we're going to have with Dr. Hines and Dr. Shields and Dr. Mioli. But Jessica prepared a spreadsheet, so if she could share a screen. This gives you the breakdown of what we're currently using the funds for in 21-22. And then also the 22-23, this is what we had planned to use the funds for. So that's really what would need to be evaluated, I guess. And the only thing, Jessica, do you want to just maybe say a couple of things about like what won't be in next year?
Sure. So I broke this up into the 3 years of funding that this covers. And you can see the first 2 years covers the ICT program. But next year, the 2 elementary teachers that were in the 21-22 grant fall off. So you're going to need to look at budgeting those 2 extra elementary teachers.
And that's really it for 22-23 of things falling off, because the 600,000 you had for the construction, that's not a recurring cost. Then you had translation headpieces, and then we had a sound system. So,
Right.
But we will be speaking about the 3 special ed teachers, the 1 general ed teacher,
Right.
and the speech therapist.
So the 2 elementary teachers are the first grade at Guggenheim and the kindergarten at Salem, correct?
Yes, that's
So
correct.
do we have a sense of, and those were really added because we were really pushing the line, and we felt like with the pandemic and everything, we didn't want to be pushing it, but we were under the limit without those teachers. Are we sure that we do need to keep those positions? or those
I
sections?
think that's going to be determined by the number
Yeah.
of students in the seats. And
Right.
that'll be something as we go forward for. But I do believe we should budget for them just to make sure we're supporting the elementary schools.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that
We
just
may,
because
can we all get this spreadsheet? I'm sorry, I don't think it was attached. If you could possibly send that to the entire board, please.
Sure.
yeah, and please add it to the agenda also.
Yes,
Um,
thank you.
Yeah. No, I just think we have to be careful that when we add something for a certain reason, that it doesn't, doesn't stay permanently if we don't have that same reason anymore, just generally speaking. Other committee members, Ms. Epstein,
Yeah.
Dr. Block, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to support that. I mean, the addition of those two, I think, was the right move for this year, because the students were so young and because of the nature of this year. And hopefully, but that class size, we have to see how big it is and where we are relative to the limits. But also, I think I certainly believe that as the student age goes up, class size, having a low class size number becomes less important. So we just have to see what the gradation is. I agree with you, Mr. Smith, that we don't have to assume that those two teachers have to be there permanently.
Go ahead, Emily.
Thank you. I just am curious because those two teachers are not in the recommendation, are not in the budget for the 22-23, the two elementary teachers. So I think that is the recommendation, not.
No, Emily, Miss Mack had said that we would have to find funding elsewhere.
Okay, all right. Then I missed that part. So I guess the question that I think, again, process-wise, is all of that needs to go into, I guess, the funding. If the projections are, if we do need the spacing, if we do need this teachers, then it needs to go into the building, I guess, projections for the costs. And when we do the planning for next year and so forth, because some of these funds, though, from what I remember, were until 2024, right? So that's the 3.5 total. So those are already accounted for, those costs. We also need, for instance, the one guidance counselor, the 4 AIS teachers, and the social workers. Up until 24, they are paid for by these ARP funds. The other discussion I think we need to start having is that how are we assessing if those positions are, like you said earlier, Adam, right? Are they needed?
Yeah.
And what are our recommendations? So I guess the committee would have to ask, where is the assessment on that? And are we planning for them for 24 on? So, these are positions that we need to, again, not for the immediate 22-23, but we do need to start talking about the big picture.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
am I missing the summer school? Wasn't there summer school paid for with this? Is that buried in here somewhere?
That's actually in the Carissa Act grant.
So that wasn't, why did I think that was ARP?
No, that and the AIS and social workers and guidance counselor are all in the Carissa Act grant.
I see.
At the June 22nd board meeting, Adam, I'm going back a bit, it was all presented as one big presentation of federal funds, and you had your Carissa and your RISA, and you had ARP. And so that's probably why it got, it was kind of blended together.
Okay, got it. Well, I'm glad we're seeing this then. Great. Anybody else have a, Dr. Block, did you talk about, no, you already went, Ms. Epstein? Okay. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to keep moving because we're still on only old business. Great. So this is really helpful. And Mrs. O'Hara, I think that for the next time we bring up this topic on old business, we'd like to talk about, thoughts on, assessment of if we want, I guess we can keep making changes until the end. So we should keep talking about it. Okay, great. So moving on to new business. So the first three topics really kind of are intertwined. We want to talk about the budget priorities. This was the flagship topic for this meeting from our original, plan of how we had planned out these meetings in the beginning of the year. How are we going to prioritize all of the priorities? This was the question we had asked in curriculum on Friday. in terms of, all of these asks and ideas. How are we going to figure out what we can pay for? And I think largely that's going to determine, that conversation is going to start, Mrs. O'Hara, when you tell us where we are budget-wise with the, and with the gap. But that will go into topic 2, which is something Ms. Epstein had wanted to add to the agenda today, which is the foundation aid increase. Wondering how that factors into the budget, and being that we are going to kind of have that, I guess, surprise injection of funds from the state, how does that change the planning that we're talking about? And I guess, how does inflation 7% this year factor into that as well? So with that, if you want to, or I guess, Julie, do you want to ask that question that you had asked first? Because I think that was a really good framing of the conversation, and then we can give the floor to Mrs. O'Hara.
Sure. So my question from earlier is, if we relate back to that 5-year facility plan, there are some priority 1 items that do not have to deal with ventilation and do not have to deal with roofs, right? So I know roofs are always a priority 1. And where in our budget priorities for this year are we on these? Are these things that definitely need to happen this year? And if so, can we look at those costs, and are they being set as our priorities for budgeting?
Yeah, and also maybe, Kathy, just expand that question to everything and all the things that we're hearing about.
Yeah. Okay. Well, to start out with, and Julie, Jim Restano has prepared a roof schedule basically, but before we go to that, we are projected to receive about 2.3 in an increase of foundation aid, which is a really wonderful thing for our school district. These are funds that you should have been receiving, but because of the different issues, we never did receive it. So our new governor has settled a lawsuit that will enable schools to receive this. We're still looking to complete the picture of the revenue side of things, because and the tax cap, we need the tax-based growth factors. We're probably going to be at a 2% tax cap because inflation is so high. We'll probably be at the 2%. Our transfer to capital is normally a little over 2 million, which has really been set aside for the roofs. But once we get into that discussion, we can talk about those priorities and anything. If you want to do a larger transfer to capital to cover some of those priorities, that is an option. The thing that's concerning about the foundation aid is this year we'll receive the 2.3. The following year, you should also receive another 2.3. After that year, people are very skeptical of how that foundation aid is going to be funded, because currently you have federal funds being infused into the state budget. So that's how they're able to fund all of these increases. But things could fall off in a couple of years. So doing things like transfer to capital, if you're doing more of those one-time kind of expenses, that is a good thing to be doing with the funds. But also, you're going to see we have a lot of needs also. So it is going to be a tricky budget season, but I'm sure we'll get there. So Jim, could you, actually, I have the roof stuff. I'm going to share that now, unless anybody has questions about anything I've just spoken about.
Sorry, Kathy, can I just ask a question? So since this is the first time we're doing this process with you, how would you recommend we go forward? So let me just give you a little history. In the past, we had the administration come to the board and say, this is what we would like to do in priorities, and this is what we think we should be putting money towards in transfer to capital. And so we relied on, clearly, definitely Jim to come to us and say, these are priorities and we need to be able to put this into transfer to capital. And then we as a board would have a discussion on whether or not we wanted to up the number, or if we thought the number was too high, or, you know, that was the kind of a discussion that the board would have to come to an agreement on. So I don't know if that is how you work as well, because again, these are new beginnings for us. And if you could, and also there's a lot of new board members who haven't gone through this process. So if you could help just kind of give us that process.
Sure. So Jim and I will work together to come up with recommendations. And then we would, similar to in the past, bring that to the board and say, and also all of you have seen the 5-year capital plans, you know, so we will bring that forward and say, this is what we see as the priorities, and just to make sure we're in line with you to answer any questions you may have. Currently, all of the budget builders, they've been working in Envision. That's our financial system. They've been putting all of their requests in, and they're going to be discussing those things as well. By the end of January, I'll have a first draft, and we'll start talking about all of the, I think we have 4 budget sessions that people will be discussing things with the board. And then after that, we'll have a tighter picture of what the budget will look like. We'll know better what the tax cap is going to look like, and just different economic factors that we'll be facing. Okay, great. All right, so I am going to share my screen with the can't seem to find it. You know what, Jim, could you start taking us through, and I'll open the program. If you could take us through the roof, just like the first year amount, and I'll find it. I don't want to keep everyone waiting. I can't hear you.
I'm sorry, I'm muted. Are you looking for the 5-year schedule of roofs?
Yes.
All right, let me see if I have that open here. I believe I do.
Oh, you do.
Oh, it's not letting me share. That's weird.
I have it on mine actually. So.
Oh, wait a minute. There we are. How's that?
Oh, you have?
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So I went through the rest of the roof sections in the buildings, and this is what we came up with. So Schreiber, Salem, and again, these are the numbers we have, and they're in priority 1 and 2. If we continue with the $2 million in the capital, I believe we'll be in good shape for the next few years that are coming. And then to finish Schreiber, we would probably either extend it out or up the transfer to capital in future years. So does that make sense to everyone?
So Jim, for the current year, can you scroll up a little? For 21-22, these are things we've worked on over the summer. These are complete, correct?
No, these are Schreiber is Schreiber and Salem are in the budget now that are going to be done this summer. So these were already voted on.
Oh, okay.
So this 1899 will happen this summer. That was already voted. So we did not. The next set for the next budget we're working on now would be the next set where it says proposed.
Right, okay. And that's because it takes a while, once it gets
Correct.
approved, to go up to state ed and.
Yes, that's,
turnaround time.
yes. And
Okay.
it seems that we've been getting a faster turnaround with John Grillo than we have in the past with our older architect, our other architect. The projects that we do give him after this budget passes will be hopefully approved.
Okay,
So I'm sorry. So the 21, 22 projects would be done, would be
Starting
done.
in this June, this
Okay.
coming June 22,
Okay. And those are funded.
correct?
I see. Okay. So the 2022, 23, we would be funding in the upcoming budget, and they would be starting at the end of next school year. Is that
Correct.
okay? Can you scroll down? How far does this go?
for 5 years.
Yeah, it was in years, well, but it's priority actually. So if we get down to the next set, which is 23, 24, and then you have 24, 25, that's the big year that I said we'd either start adding to the transfer to capital or put the projects off another year.
I see.
Jim, if you let me share my screen, I can show the buildings, the footprints,
Okay.
and then we could
Stop
show.
sharing?
Sure.
Stop sharing?
Yes, please. Okay, and I'll share. This way we can provide everybody with.
Yep.
Okay. So John Grillo actually provided this for us. If you can see the yellow shading, this is what Jim had as priority 1. And the blue has already been done.
No.
No.
No, the
Oh,
blue,
I'm sorry.
the blue is what we're projecting.
Okay, you're right.
And
That's
those
for
are broken
priority
up,
2.
those are broken up into years, and the priority shifts as we go. It goes to Daly in 22, 23, and then goes back to Schreiber again because of the age of the roofs. So it's all those sections that you showed in Schreiber up on that first slide would eventually be taken care of by 24, 25.
Okay. So
Or
this
longer,
priority.
depending on the funding.
Okay. So this priority 1 is what's happening next.
The yellow, that is gonna happen this coming summer that's funded, correct? And then Weber, there's a small piece at Weber. A couple of pieces is there, and then I believe there's a penthouse area. I think if you scroll a little more. Yeah, those 2 little areas down. Yes, those 2. That would complete Weber 100%.
This is Sousa.
And then you have, which one is this?
This is Sousa.
Sousa is completed. This yellow section was completed this past summer, summer of 21. Sousa is in very good shape now.
And this is
And this-
Daly.
Yep, this is where the priority shifts. And I just want to take a minute to point out something. Again, I've said this in the past, and I want to say it again. That orange section, 1997. If you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, that little section of roof was done obviously in 1997. That the yellow shaded was done when they did the 2004. The difference between the 2, one is a rubber material and one is a built up asphalt in 1997. That roof is still in good shape, believe it or not. And that's, so just, I want to make everybody understand that the roofs we're installing are similar to that 1997 roof, which means we're going to get a lot of longevity out of the roofs that are being installed for the past 14 years. And the reason why I say the past 14 years is because that's when I started, that's the type of roof I recommended. So when these roofs are done in the next few years, in 24, 25, the district will be in very good shape. Not to say you should ignore the roofs, but you'll be in much better shape than you are now. And I just want to put that out there.
So you're saying when you finish, you're not starting from the beginning again?
There you go. What we should be able to do is
Getting off the hamster wheel.
possibly get recertification on these roofs because they're eligible for that, which is a very good thing. So it was money well spent. It was a little more expensive, but we're seeing the fruits of the extra money we spent.
Yeah.
So,
Mr.
So Jim,
Rossano.
this is Manor Haven. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead. So when you're showing these roofs, are those the only envelope problems we have? Are we generally watertight?
once the roofs are done, usually what we do with a roof project is masonry, like repointing. So that's the next process, pointing and windows usually. Once we get the roofs done, because the roofs cause the pointing to go bad. That usually is what happens. So you have to fix the problem at the foundation. On this point, it's not the foundation, it's on the
Right.
upper foundation.
Metaphorical foundation.
Exactly. So as you fix those problems, the others and the masonry, that all that goes away. And down the road, the money that you're spending on all these roofs can be spent to enhance the district in other ways. So that's my goal.
So the Daly was the only building that they had pointing needed, right, on the 5-year plan. So could we take that to assume that we're generally in good shape? Okay.
Weber had an aggressive pointing schedule years ago. And we were, unfortunately, our funding was cut. And there are some areas at Weber. And you'll notice this past year, we also did the chimney upgrade, a reconstruction. That was all a point. And the initial pointing project that was unfunded. Weber does have some more pointing.
Jim, I'm sorry to interrupt, but could you just explain what pointing is?
Yes.
Just for people that don't know.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Pointing is the repair of the mortar joints between the bricks on the exterior of the building. What happens that degrades when you get moisture and freezing and thawing, the mortar starts to pop out, and thus you get moisture in the building. So that's why it's important to have an envelope sealed on your buildings, starting with the roof, with the masonry and windows. Those are the major components of the envelope. Where again, we've nipped at it a little at a time, but the last couple of years we've taken a big bite out of it, and I do see the light at the end of the tunnel with this schedule that we have, and I thank the board for upping that amount that they upped a couple of years ago, and it was a very good decision, I feel. So Guggenheim is another building that is 100% completed. Manor Haven has one small section that is needed. Again, it's not an urgent. And Salem is on the schedule also as a, where are we? We're going back to Salem on a priority 2 after we finish this year. That orange section you see right now is the small section we just completed this summer. The section next to it that goes to the left, 2004 section, is the one that's going to be done this coming summer with the funding that we have now.
Great.
And this is Guggenheim. As you can see, there's no numbers in there because this one's complete, and it's in very good shape.
Questions from the committee? Great, that was really thorough. And I guess the recommendation is that we would continue with the schedule that the previous boards had committed to in this regard.
Yes, that is what we're hoping. So for next year, for 22-23, we have about 1.4 million to cover the roofs. So if you were to stick with the 2 million transfer, you'd have about 600,000 to use on those priority one, which you see is not very much, you know.
Right. Okay. So, Mr. O'Hara, when you kind of prepare that for the board and we get into the budget process, can you make sure that you're kind of showing us like what we had, what everything was last year, if we kept everything the same, what's committed to, what's left, kind of what's our, I know you guys hate this term slush fund, but kind of what's our area, what's our play, what's our give?
Yes. Yeah, I
Yeah.
like play.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, definitely.
Okay, great. Just Mr. Rosano, just one more question on the roofs. And I'm gonna channel my Dr. Block hat here. We had tremendous damage from the hurricane at the beginning of the year. In this is where I'm going to channel Dr. Block. I don't expect that we shouldn't see more hurricanes like that based on the just kind of the trajectory of how things have been going. Do you feel that these roof projects are getting us closer to being watertight from that type of storm, or do we have other things that are causing us to have had that level of damage at all the buildings?
The most recent storm, Ida, we sustained damage not from our roofs. We sustained damage from water coming from flooding, from heavy rains. That's where all our damage occurred. And I hate to say this, and I gotta knock on wood, our roofs held up well.
Right.
With that.
So that's kind of that's kind of what's concerning about it. That's why I'm bringing it up.
Okay. Concerning in which way?
Well, meaning that the roofs held up, but we still had millions of dollars of water damage. So what I'm wondering is, that's what I'm getting at is, would that happen again if we had the same storm again?
It depends on the storm, Adam.
Yeah.
Storm, this one came with 6 inches of rain in an hour.
Right.
Some storms have 150-mile-an-hour winds, and we'd sustain a different type of damage. Would probably be water and maybe broken windows and roofs peeling off because of the high winds. So it's hard to say what storm is going to do what, but it's a tough question to answer.
Yeah.
Adam, we have
Yeah.
also, Jim has worked with our architects on the drainage system in Weber. So they're going to actually be coming, is it over the break, Jim?
Yeah, they're starting over the break. We discovered a couple of things that can be changed to alleviate some of that flooding. In addition, I'm working with FEMA on a mitigation plan for maybe to get some funding for some items that we can do to avoid some of the type of flooding we had. So there's a lot of work that's been going on behind the scenes that I'm just bringing up now. So the mitigation I'm staying on. They offered it, and I'm once they offered it, that's all they had to say, and we'll be on it. So that we have to work with our architect to come up with a design. I believe after the holidays, we're going to start doing that.
Oh, I'm sorry I broke your surprise. That's but I'm glad to hear that. So I think the short answer to the question is yes, we are still vulnerable, but you're on it and you're trying to make us less vulnerable, I guess, to the extent you can.
All the time.
Okay. Great. Anybody else?
So one more thing I kind of wanted to mention also is, and it kind of leads into the next area, the capital reserve. If you look at all of the priority ones on our 5-year list, I think a capital reserve would be a good way to eventually fund some of those things in the future. So if that is something that the board would like to consider at budget time, I think it would be very well worth it, just because of all of the priorities that we have.
Okay. So let's jump. See, I told you items 1 through 3 all tied together.
Yeah.
That was great segue. So let's jump right into this item 3, which is the capital reserve. And obviously in this committee, we can't make a decision about that, but we do need to make a recommendation to the board. Could you start, Mrs. O'Hara, by just explaining for all of us and whoever in the community might be watching the meeting, just exactly the mechanics of a capital reserve, like literally
Sure.
Explain like on 5 version?
Sure. So the district has several reserves that it can use. We can use a workers' comp reserve. We can use a retirement reserve. We can use an employee benefits accrued liability reserve. There's several reserves. Those don't require any special approval by the public. The board can just set it up on their own. And what we do is we put monies aside so that if there's a big increase one year, it'll help offset that to kind of ride the waves, basically. But in order to set up a capital reserve, you do need voter approval. So what you would do is you would say, we're going to set up a capital reserve of $5 million or $6 million. And what would happen is if you have funds left over at the end of the year, the board could vote to put the money into it up to $5 million. So, and then if you wanted to go higher than that, you would again have to go out to the public and say, we either want to start another capital reserve. You can have several reserves. One could be an air conditioning reserve. One could be a reserve for playgrounds. You know, so it is good to, or just have a capital reserve that you want to fund some of our priorities for our 5-year plan.
2 questions. Does the capital reserve become its own line on the ballot, or is it part of the budget? Is the first question. And the second question is, can we also fund the capital reserve through taxes, or is that part without piercing the tax cap? In other words, is that a separate item or is it under the tax cap?
Right. So the capital reserve is actually its own proposition. So it'll have its own box that people would have to check off on. It would be funded by taxpayer dollars because you could have a separate line similar to how you have it transferred to capital. It could be the same transfer to the reserve fund. You could do that, but it won't impact the tax cap. You won't get like a discount for having it because you're not going to actually be spending the funds until prior years. So when you actually spend the funds, that's when it may affect the tax cap. But
I guess my question is though, could we ask the voters to fund dollars into that reserve specifically, or not? In other words, like, could we say, hey, we want to add to our budget $300,000 to fund the reserve? I guess, and can we? And if we can, how does that impact the tax cap?
Right. So you could actually have a line item that says this is to fund the reserve. It's not going to affect the tax cap. It's going to increase the amount of funds you have to levy on the taxpayers. Right now, you get a capital exemption in the tax cap, and I think that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, I'm asking if this is exempt.
No.
Like, no,
it's not exempt because you're not going to be spending it until future years. So the exemption comes with when you actually spend the funds. So like we may transfer the 2 point whatever million to capital, but if Jim isn't going to spend it for another year and a half, it shouldn't be covered. It shouldn't be part of the tax cap exemption. It's when you plan to have the expenditures. So you can't transfer money into a capital reserve and spend it that same year. You have to again go out to the voters in a future year and request to spend it. So it's much more difficult to spend it when you put it in a reserve.
But what about in terms of putting it? What do I guess assess it or levying it to get it into the reserve? That's what I'm not. Julie, do you understand what I'm asking? Maybe I'm not understanding something with,
I understand I think I'm understanding what you're saying. You're asking, so, but to remember, when we do the budget, we're really approving $167 million. And
Right.
then from that and then we have capital, transfer to capital is included in that $167 million. And we have all of our reserves. Rarely do we talk about approving how much is in our reserves, as far as, because we have to stay within a 4% of our total budget increase, right? And there are
Right.
other rules regarding reserves. So I think you're asking the question, would we ever say to the taxpayers, hey, taxpayers, we're moving $2 million and can you vote on it? You don't have to vote on how much we're moving. That would be the board would say,
Right.
we're setting a limit up to $5 million. And as Kathy said, if we have excess, or as has happened in the past on the board, I know there's been excess in like a TRS or an ERS account. And we've said, we would like that excess to be moved into a capital reserve potentially, right? So we as a board would make that decision. We don't have to go to the taxpayers to vote to make that, if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly.
Yeah, I think
correct?
that's the correct. Yeah. Sorry,
Okay.
I wasn't asking it properly, but yes, that's the question. Thank you. But I think you had a question of your own, Julie.
Yeah, no, I did. Thank you. So I guess my question is, Kathy, if we're doing a capital reserve, oh wait, I just lost my question. I have two questions though. For a capital reserve, we have to vote to, as a board, to establish the capital reserve to a certain point. And then we have to also vote, ask the taxpayers to vote if we want to expend that money. If we were to ask the taxpayers to vote to expend that money outside of our normal voting cycle, right? So if we didn't include it on as a proposition in our May budget, we still have to pay an expense, right? To set up our polling booths and something and all that. So I just want to make sure we're all aware that there's like a 10,000, I know it's negligible in the grand scheme of things, but there is still an expense when you want to pull money out. It's not like you can just pull it out and it's easy to have voter. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And typically what schools will do is in May of the next year, they might, or like 2 years down the road or 3 years down the road, they do it at the same time as the budget vote. There would be no impact to the tax levy because it's already been put aside.
Right. So this would just be a planning. If you wanted to expend those funds, there would also be planning, just like there's planning to create a
Correct,
capital reserve. And then my next question is are we limited in this particular reserve? Do we have the same standards or as our other fund balances that we can only have a certain percentage of our total budget included in this? Or can you set a capital reserve for whatever amount and it doesn't matter, right?
Yes.
Is that my understanding? Okay.
Right. So you could set it for $30 million if you wanted to do the air conditioning. You could say, we want to put 30 million aside for air conditioning. So you could take excess and keep funding it. At the end of each year, you keep funding it. But when you go to spend it, you can only spend it on air conditioning related expenses. So you could also have another reserve for capital improvements, which might be this one, and you would put funds in there.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Adam?
So it seems to me that this is essentially just a savings account, correct?
Correct.
And so I guess my question is that we have savings ideally, in some years. What happens to, and if we set up this reserve, we then have to vote, not just to set up the reserve, which I'm not at all concerned about. What I'm concerned about is the fact that every time we want to take money out of the reserve, we have to ask the taxpayers, and taxpayers in different years may be less amenable to doing things that currently it seems like we are able to do. So I guess my question is that what happens to that money now? If you were to have a $3 million excess, like where would that money live now?
It would actually be in the bank, and it would just be each year that we're audited, we would make sure we're keeping track of it, and it would sit there until it's time to spend it and until the voters agree that it's a good time to spend it. So
well,
this
but
is
the voters, sorry, Mr. O'Hara. So, but the voters don't have to approve that spend. Like, so if we have $3 million and it's in the bank, and I figured it would be in the bank, they don't have to approve that spending. So it can either be in what I'm hearing now, it can be in an account where we don't have to get voter approval on the spending, or it can be in an account where we do have to get voter approval on the spending. Am I understanding that correctly?
I thought we were just talking about the capital reserve. You're talking about all of our reserves.
No, I'm talking about the capital reserve. But let's say we wanted to spend $100,000 on a, well, I won't, on ventilation upgrades.
Mhm.
And one way to do that would be to take savings that we have and put that in a capital reserve, and then next year vote on taking that $100,000 out.
No,
The
you wouldn't.
alternative would,
No, can I try answering? So Adam, in order for us to have a capital reserve account, we must first put it on the ballot in May that says that the community is giving us permission to have a capital reserve account. Once the board decides what money goes in, so we could have an excess at the end of the school year budget, for instance, 22, 23, or 23, 24, because we would be a year out. We have an excess of $100,000, let's say, that is left over. We as a board could say that our excess money gets put into our capital reserve. When the board says we want to put air conditioning and it's going to cost $100,000 per tent in a building, the board would have to then get permission from the community to take that money out of the capital reserve fund. It would be again at a vote. Okay, so it would be, we can't decide. If the board wanted to do it as transfer to capital, that's a different story. So in order to have a capital reserve fund, you're basically putting money into a savings account for capital projects that we decide need to get done.
So Emily, what I'm not understanding, and this is the same question I asked when Dr. Hines brought this up at the last meeting, is if we always have a gap and we're always cutting to fund the next year, where is the money coming to fund the savings account?
Yeah.
That's my question about this whole model.
So Dr. Kathy, do you want to answer? Because there are savings at the end of the year. There are always, I mean, we have a very tight budget, is my understanding, and we don't have a lot of, but at the end of the year.
But the word on the wind is that Kathy wanted to be much more tight.
So I think Kathy, I think Kathy thinks we were too tight. If you
I think
want
you
to,
were too restrictive. Yes.
it's the other way around.
Sorry, when I say that she wanted to be more specific. So we shouldn't
Yes, I
have
want to
that.
be
Yeah.
transparent. I want you to understand where all of the funds are being allocated to.
Please.
But with certain budget lines, you do need to have a contingency. So with special needs students, for instance, you could have a family that moves in with 5 special ed students. That could cost a significant amount of money. You could have a number of students that are homeless that need to be transported to another school. That could be a significant amount of money. So you want to budget for those contingencies, but if you don't have those contingencies, you'll have excess funds. So that's what would go into your savings, which we're not allowed to budget for savings. We're only allowed to go up to 4% of the next year's budget. That's basically our savings, our unallocated fund balance.
I see.
So,
Okay.
and so instead of what we did this year is we had an excess of, maybe it was like 1.8 million. So we took some of those funds and we moved it into employee benefits accrued liability, the retirement fund, a workers' comp reserve. So that's how you would fund savings.
Okay. Thanks so much. That kind of clears up. That's what I was trying to get to at the beginning. Thank you so much.
All right.
Ms. Epstein, did you have a question before we?
Ms. O'Hara just explained, I think just to Adam Block's other point, Adam, did what Ms. O'Hara just say answer your question? Because I actually heard your question to be at the end of the year, if we didn't have a capital reserve account set up, where does the excess money go, right? And so we have certain reserve funds that we are allowed to say, yes, we would like to put the money in these reserve funds, this excess money that Kathy was just describing. And those reserve funds do not necessarily require a voter approval to withdraw the funds if needed. They just need a board resolution. However, as she said, we're capped at the amount of money that we can keep in those funds versus a capital reserve account. We would not be capped. So if we wanted to start and grow that savings count to be larger than the 4%, that would be the benefit I see from a capital reserve account. Unless, if I've misstated that, please correct me.
That's correct.
No, that's very succinct. I think that's well said. So I think the action item is, once again, should we take a sense of the committee if this is something we want to bring to the board? I'm not sure where I stand on, I'll go first. I'm not sure where I stand on how I would vote from the board standpoint, but I definitely think it's worth bringing to the board for a conversation. So I would definitely vote to recommend to the board that we further explore it. Dr. Block?
So I think we should all, quite honestly, I think we should all know where we are on this before we bring it to the board with a recommendation. It doesn't mean we have to agree, but we should probably be settled on it. I have a couple of more questions, or at least I want to talk through it to make sure that my understanding is correct. So my understanding then would be that if we want to not rely on the community to vote for, $100,000 capital expenditure and have to actually vote on it, then we would use the current resources, the ability we have to put money for the first 4%. And then only if we go in excess of that 4% would we then use the capital reserve. In other words, the first portion of savings should go into the current place that we are saving, because then we don't have to get a vote on it. And only in excess of that would we want to put money in the capital reserve. Is that correct?
No, actually, everything that we spend has to be approved by the voters. So with our budget, that's why we have to put a $2 million transfer to capital, and all of our equipment lines, the voters need to see everything we spend on capital. So that 4% that we have as savings, that's actually if you have an unforeseen event, like a boiler explodes and there's an emergency, we have to replace it, then we could use that 4%, but everything has to be funded through the general fund budget. Unless we're getting.
Okay, so then let me follow up with another question. The question that we have to ask the voters about the $100,000 expenditure, is that a separate line item from yes, I vote for the budget, or no, I don't vote for the budget?
Yeah, so you'll have the first
That's what I had
proposition
asked.
would be the budget.
Okay.
The second one would be, do you approve the funding of a capital reserve?
But in the prior case that you said, Mrs. O'Hara, it is basically just a budget line item and the voters are voting yes or no on the budget.
Correct.
So that's where this gets complicated. Every time you open up another, but like, I think we'll get plenty of votes for the budget. However, if you open up another line item, I don't know what's going to happen with that line item. And it requires more marketing and things like that to prove to the voters, even for a $50,000 expense, which in the scope of our budget is relatively small. So I guess what I'm saying is that we still have the 4% that we can use, correct? Like we could open up this capital reserve and just not fund it until we exceed the 4%, which would, I think, be the way that.
No, you can't touch that 4%. You leave the 4% there. It's a contingency because you can't touch it. You don't have permission to spend it because we get permission to spend via the voters and our budget. That's what gives us the permission. So that 4% is in excess of our budget. So you can never touch that unless it's an emergency or something like that.
So like Adam, so like we couldn't plan to do tens of millions of dollars of air conditioning work just by hitting that 4% year after year, right? That's what she's telling us. But what we could do is have the taxpayers create an air conditioning reserve fund that we could fund over time. And then we could go back and say, hey, we have $7 million sitting here. We want to do our electric project. And we could ask them to vote for it. And it could either be in a special election or in the normal budget vote. That's what we've, I think, gathered from this meeting. So what
That's
I'm
what-
saying, Adam, is when I said I'm not sure how I'd vote on the actual board is, I think we need to explore this because we don't know what our budget priorities are yet, and we don't know what we are going to want to fund. And if the board is even going to want to go ahead with the air conditioning, or maybe we want to create a playground reserve fund that we can fund over time. So I think the point is, I don't know how I would vote on setting, when it comes to actually setting up the reserve, but I think it's something that the board could talk about and authorize the administration to make it part of their planning when they present to us how they want to, go ahead with everything. And that's really the question for the board is, do we want the administration to explore this? And, would we support it if they came back with a plan showing that it works? Is that?
Okay.
Adam, can I just suggest also that if you present this to the entire board, that Ms. O'Hara could do like a brief explanation of what a capital reserve, what capital reserve is and what it would mean and what we use in the process. Because I think it would be helpful to have this discussion again. And
I think they're all watching. So hopefully,
Again, I understand, but I think everybody can use a refresher by the time we get to the board meeting, which is January 11th. Me personally, I will have forgotten everything by then.
Okay. Well, mark your calendars, guys, for 4 hours on January 11th. Just kidding.
Not really. It depends on all of the other comments. Not really.
Okay. So
Can I just add?
You're up, Julie.
So I think it's my understanding also that at the end of the year, when we're looking at our budget, and if we do have excess, the presentation will be made, Board of Education, how do you want this excess to be dispersed? And if in that calendar year, we say we don't want any excess added to our capital reserve fund, and we want it all to go into fund balance or wherever else, that will be a decision also. So just the establishment of a capital reserve fund is my understanding does not bind us as a Board of Education or even our taxpayers that money always has to go in there. It's still at the discretion based on the year. And just something I thought I'd put out there. So as far as recommendations are concerned, I don't see a lose situation to putting the capital reserve as a proposition on our May ballot, because whether we put money into it or not this year, just having it there and having that process checked off is a win, I see, because it gives us the ability to put monies in, unless I'm misunderstanding the process. Is that correct?
Agreed.
It's opening a savings account. It's not funding it.
Exactly.
It's having permission to put it there if you have the excess.
So, Julie, do you want to give your vote?
Oh, I'm sorry. I am recommending that we do go forward. I recommend we recommend the capital reserve. Yes, thanks.
Okay, great. Okay, so the next agenda item is a conversation about live streaming and potential alternatives to, how to solve the issue of kids who are with COVID or quarantine. Dr. Hines is not able to be at this meeting today, so he had requested that we postpone this topic until he's able to attend. I'm not sure.
No, I think Adam. I think he also said that Ms. O'Hara had the data. So
right.
I think in the interest of, we can just get the data or the numbers, and we can have maybe. He just said he can't be here. So, but I think we can still have the discussion. I know there's so many other things going on with regards to.
Well, that's kind of the point, right? Is does it make, are your numbers accurate, Kathy? Kind of where we are today. That's really the question.
Well, so the numbers that I've prepared were for home tutoring. If you needed to home tutor, it was for 5 hours at the high school and middle school per week, and 2.5 hours at the elementary school. And that would be for roughly 50 students. It would vary from 40 to 60 students. and that would start in February and end in June. That would cost about $1.6 million.
Say that again, Kathy?
Hold on.
It would cost $1.623 million, $1.6 million to provide 5 hours per week at the high school, middle school, 2.5 hours for all of the elementary school in total. And that would be about 40 to 50 students on average each month from February till June.
Hey, Emily, I'm going to push back on you because I'm just rereading Dr. Hines' email, and he did ask specifically that we postpone the conversation, and then said if we weren't comfortable with that, he understood. But I'm just thinking that without him being here and being, how different the quarantine numbers are this week versus a week ago.
Listen, I just wanted to hear the numbers that Kathy had, and so just hearing $1.6 million, my real question is, how are we funding it? So, I mean, whether or not it's 50 students or, and yes, and right now I believe those numbers are much higher. So I do believe that per Dr. Hines' request, and just in reality of what the COVID surge is right now, maybe we should re-examine this in, the next budget meeting that you have scheduled, and maybe the numbers will have changed by then. But I knew Kathy had the number, and I just wanted to hear the number.
Got it. Okay. So Dr. Black, go ahead.
Sorry, and this will be the last question. Ms. O'Hara, who would be the recipient of that budget amount? Who would be receiving that money?
Those would be teachers that would be providing the home tutoring.
Okay, thank you.
And how would they be providing home tutoring to people in quarantine or with COVID or in isolation?
I believe it's via Zoom or something.
Virtual, they're not going somewhat.
That's correct.
It would just be that they'd be able to do, specifically to those students, instead of live streaming and watching the class, they could spend focus time.
So it's like virtual school. It's a virtual school, basically, you're proposing.
Yeah, it's a virtual
like an ad hoc virtual school as needed.
Virtual tutoring. Virtual tutoring.
Right.
It would be like an hour a week.
So Adam, can I request that because this did come out of the board meeting, but can I request that you please at the next board meeting as part of your presentation include that maybe we will continue this discussion after. Okay. I just wanted to close the loop on that.
Yeah. And Kathy, if you could give us the numbers, also what it would look like in a surge like we're having now, not just kind of based on what it had been up until now. Yeah.
Sure, I can try working on that. I think it would be very difficult to project the expenses.
Got it. But maybe just if you look at say the last week, the number of students, imagine if we weren't going to break, just look at how many kids we have out right now who would qualify, what that cost would be.
Or if you just have an hourly amount, we could, we would
That's
have an idea, right? If you say, if for 5 hours per week for a high school or middle student is $200 a student, and it's $100 for an elementary, I'm using round numbers here, that would allow us to do our own kind of mathematical.
I do have a spreadsheet put together. So it's not difficult to, but the rate is the same for high school or elementary schools.
Could you circulate that spreadsheet?
Right.
Okay. Dr. Shields, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify to make sure the committee is aware that home instruction is one-on-one instruction. In this case, since someone needs to quarantine, it would be done virtually, but it's one-on-one teaching.
And how many, so in this one-on-one scenario, just so since we are talking about it, can you just tell us how many hours each student would get per day?
Sure. So how it was calculated was each student would receive 5 hours per week. So I guess that would be 1 hour a day at the high school and middle school level. And then at the elementary school, they would receive 2.5 per week.
Okay. And then Dr. Shields, do you think that the 1 hour a day would be appropriate, for example, for a student who's in 5 AP classes in the high school?
Well, that's a value judgment question there. And I know Ms. O'Hara was asked to run a model to calculate some expenditures. But I think that would have to be looked at more closely to decide, is this a sufficient number of contact hours for a child?
Yeah. So I
I'm
think
sorry,
before,
wait, can I just ask another
Yeah.
question? But this would not be in replacement of that student getting whatever assignments and whatever is put into the portal or, for their work that they're missing, right? It's just in addition to that, the Google Classroom assignments, wherever they're putting it, Aspen. I have no idea where teachers are putting
yeah,
it.
so you're talking about like 10 Google Classroom is basically like 10 days of the old manila envelope, basically being done.
I don't know,
Yeah.
Adam. I don't know if it's, I don't know your manila envelopes versus my kids' manila envelopes, if they're the same.
Right.
If Google, I doubt it,
Right.
because manila was just a, copied sheet. I pretty much believe that actual information is going into Google Classroom. But that being aside, this would be in addition to, right? So they'd have access to whatever there's given as assignments, plus they would then have a 1 hour tutor for, their class. Okay.
So I guess, yeah. So Dr. Shields, before we would talk about this in the next meeting, I think we'd want to understand, like, is there consistency between Google Classroom for every high school student? What is in Google Classroom? And we want to understand how, like, different students of different needs would be getting their education, because again, 10 days of school and what, compared to 1 hour a day of tutoring, I'm just wondering, like, can the same teacher teach them AP Earth Science and, AP Calculus? And, I just want to understand how you're envisioning this would work before we analyze the numbers. And if it actually is going to work for the students.
Okay.
So, great. Ms. Epstein, go ahead.
I was just going to add to that. I guess it would be helpful. Maybe people don't understand the home instruction program. So just providing what that means, because I think it's going to be run very similar to how we run our current home instruction program if someone has to be absent for a long period of time. So giving those concrete examples, not all classes are covered by home instruction. So it is those basic core classes is my understanding. So again, when we talk about this in the future, having as much information about as what's being provided will be most helpful for all of us, I think. Please.
Thanks so much. Okay, so we actually have 5 minutes left and we have 2 more topics and community comments. Is anybody unable to extend this meeting by 10, 15 minutes? Is anybody rushing out? Because I really don't want to cut this. Okay, so I apologize to anyone in the community who's watching, but we do need to keep going. Topic 5 is Guggenheim Preserve. That was a request of someone, I don't remember who, Julie, so I'm going to give you the floor for this.
Yeah, so we were presented with an ask or a present, I don't know if it was a formal ask, but that there will be some expenditures from the school district based on the work with Residents Forward and the Guggenheim Preserve cleanup. I just was asking, as someone who's been part of the process of Guggenheim Preserve from the beginning, we've been asking Residents Forward to provide us with their business plan and the scope of project, especially if it was going to incur a financial impact. It is my understanding that they were going to be fundraising for any and all financial impacts. So the fact that, again, they're coming and asking for maintenance crew and there are some expenditures that are cropping up, I don't feel confident that we should be approving the spending of any of those monies since we don't even know what the business plan is moving forward. So I would just like to ask if we can get some more information on the business plan and future expenditures and how they're being funded.
Sure.
Kathy,
Could I actually provide a slight update? Jim Restano and I have been meeting with the Residents Forward in order for them to apply for grant funding, which is what they've been doing. They needed to know on the district side what our level of commitment would be, I guess, to show that there's a plan to maintain this. So what Jim and I had said is we could probably have about $3,000 a year because we do obviously plantings. It's not every year that we do tons of plantings, just as things may be destroyed, we might do plantings, but we were going to propose to the board if we could spend maybe $3,000 a year for the preserve. And also we can allocate one of the B and G positions, like a fraction of the worker's time, to going and helping to maintain, not a lot of maintenance, but to actually make sure the preserve is receiving the care that it needs from our perspective, because they are going to have a lot of volunteers taking care of it. So that was what we were going to propose at budget time. We did have a situation with the MOU signing. One of the partners in there has actually backed out. So we're going to take them out of the MOU so that we can finally have that signed. We've been working on that for quite a while.
Okay. I mean, I guess I'm even with that answer, I kind of feel exactly the same way Julie does. I don't know if that changed, and I think we just need to understand kind of what we're talking about, big picture, before I would personally support that.
Okay.
Dr.
You know,
Bach.
I'm sure that they would be willing to come and speak with the board. When I sit in on the meetings, I see all of the work. They have a national parks preservation. They're working on designs for it and everything. And the amount of work that they're putting into it, there's a great deal of time and energy that they're putting into it. But I also see their perspective is they're doing all of this for the school district's property. And if the school isn't going to maintain it, all of this work that they're putting into it, I don't think their grants, the people they're seeking the grant funds from, are not going to want to support it, because it's going to kind of just be thrown in the wind.
I think that's completely reasonable position that those people would take, and I don't think anyone is saying that we wouldn't support it. We just need to understand kind of big picture, and I think it's like an entire board question. And for this committee to make a recommendation to the entire board, I just think we need to have a better understanding of kind of. I think Julie put it perfectly. What's the business plan? What's the long term? What's the ask going to be long term?
Mhm.
And then I'm sure that we can have a conversation about supporting it. I saw hands raised and they just went down. Anybody have something else? No? Okay, great. So I think we're.
So would you like me to have a representative at the next budget and facilities meeting? They could, yeah, because some of them are located in like Pennsylvania, and people that are working on this and stuff.
That would be great.
Okay.
And I'm their liaison, and I'm meeting with them, I believe, Wednesday or Tuesday, like within the next day or two. So I'm going to ask some of these questions and mention this to them when I speak to them.
Yeah, and Adam mentioned to them that we'd like to have them at a meeting. I don't know if it's the next one or after, but that would be great.
But board or budget?
Budget.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So that brings us to our last topic before community comments, use of facilities after school programs. And I don't think we're going to solve this today, but the genesis of this is that, so just kind of backing up, Adam and I, this was a priority of ours, was trying to, look into kind of, expanding after school options. And one thing that came up recently is that one of the vendors had reached out to us and to Mrs. O'Hara, and being interested in, expanding their program within the district. And I personally, and I spoke to Julie and Adam about this, we're thinking that if we are going to consider expanding it, we should probably look at a fair way to do that. How do we currently? So Mrs. O'Hara, could you kind of talk about how does a vendor become a vendor of an after-school program in the district currently? What does the district get out of it? How does it all work? And if we were going to look at expanding more opportunities, what do you envision that process should look like, and how do we make it equitable to all the current vendors and potential?
Can we also speak? Can we also speak in code? So can we give specifics as to what you're talking about?
I didn't know if it was appropriate. to say the specifics, but yes, Port Aftercare, from the PRC, I think it is, right? It runs a program in Delhi. We have JCC runs a program in Guggenheim. I know we have I think the Japanese school runs a program in one of the buildings, and the Port Aftercare folks had reached out looking to take on more schools to run their program. And that's, so I guess really the question is, if there is in fact a need in the community to have more aftercare programs at more schools, how should we as a board and a district handle that in a way that's beneficial to the families, beneficial to the district, and at a minimum economically neutral to the school, and I guess fair to all of the vendors who we work with. Adam, do you want to say something?
Yeah, let me just add on, which is that I agree. This is something that I had, Adam and I had run on, which is that after school options in the community are limited. I can tell you from personal experience that we tried to get, when I moved into this community, my family has 2 working parents, and we tried to get our kids into PRC, and they said they could take one of our twins and not both. I won't tell you which twin. But the point is that there are huge and so in doing some research in this, there are very long waiting lists. Not only that, is we actually ended up going to JCC for a while at Guggenheim. I live in the Salem district, 2 blocks from the Salem school, but my kids had to spend 30 minutes loading onto the bus, and then we had to go an extra 10 to 12 minute drive. So basically they were driving for an extra 30, 40, 50 minutes a day, because there's no program in our current school. That is true for Manor Haven, and that is true for Salem and Susa. So the idea would be, are there opportunities to expand some of the elementary, after school, and maybe even before school programs to some of the other elementary schools, because it would benefit parents, and also it would save the district on the busing from all of the elementary schools, because if you're just moving the kids from their classroom to a different classroom, obviously there's no busing there. So we want to look into, now we want to be fair to all our vendors, as Adam said, which is that it doesn't have to be a current vendor in the district, but we want to know what it would take to expand those programs, and hear what process we would go about to potentially do that.
Yeah, and I see Emily's raising her hand, but Emily, can I ask Kathy first to kind of just tell us how the process works now? What are the contracts?
Well, that's what I just want to make a point of clarification regarding that. There's 2 different things that I'm hearing. One is expanding after school programs, which is what I know you, Adam Block, ran on. And the other is vendors pay us. So the school district makes money. We rent our facilities to these vendors. We do not. So I don't know that you guys are talking about the same thing.
Well, no, we are talking about the same thing, because I think the point is that right now we have the question is there first of all, these are not profit centers, right, Kathy? These after school programs, am I correct?
But for us, they are. But
no, I'm asking if I don't know if they're profit centers.
We're talking about school district business now, and the school district. So whether or not PRC is making money, or JCC, or whoever, Port Day Camp, that's not our business per se. We as school board worry about the business of the school district. The school district charges for.
Right, but I don't know if I don't think they're profit centers though for the school district. Kathy, do we make a profit?
Actually,
that's my question.
Programs after school, we don't receive funding for that.
That's what I thought.
For the Japanese school, we do receive revenue for that. So, and to answer your questions, we would do an RFP, a request for proposal of services. We could send it out to Scope. We could send it out to the 2 current, I don't know if I'd call them vendors, but suppliers of that service.
Yeah.
But I think we also have to determine, I think the JCC, they do actual activities with the students. It's not really daycare. So if
it's both. My kids are in it. It's both. So you can choose. They have daycare and enrichments, and the
Okay.
enrichments are optional. And they
Okay.
bring in their own vendors for the enrichments.
Mhm.
And that's
Okay.
part of the value. I mean, to me, that's part of the value proposition, which is that your kids don't just get daycare. They can have access to chess club or whatever kind of club that they bring in, which is different things.
So I guess really the question is, why, like, so I guess the question is, this individual is going to come to the district from, Port asking to do more schools. So really the question for us as a board is, do we want to support those programs expanding? Is there a way that we can make them more of a, I guess the first way, like, are they revenue neutral right now? Like, do they pay for the keeping the heat and the lights on and the maintenance?
No,
Right.
they don't.
So so I think before we would consider adding buildings, we would have to at least make sure that it's revenue neutral.
Hold on, I'm
Right.
really confused. I'm sorry. JCC, PRC, they do not pay us a facilities.
No,
We just give the facilities to those organizations.
yes, that's how it's
For
been
what-
done in the past. When I started, I thought that was strange, so I looked into it myself.
That is a complete first time that I'm hearing this, and maybe I'm wrong for having believed this. I was always under the impression that we had a facility usage fee for everybody, and that whether you were JCC or PYA or whatever, you paid.
PYA
use
does pay, they
So
do pay for
who
the
made
use
the
of our-
determination that JCC doesn't pay, but PYA does?
That was prior to me being here,
Okay,
so
I think Adam Smith, that's a different discussion that needs to be taken up
Yeah.
then in general.
Well, that's kind of what we
Everyone.
wanted. That's kind of like the whole thing is, like, I wanted to have it's really, we're past time on the meeting. We're at 10:39, but I really wanted to have like a really thoughtful conversation about our overall approach to after school, if you want to call them suppliers in the district. And I'm not looking to like start charging on people who haven't been paying historically and raising
I
costs on
am.
families. But
I
I want to make sure.
am.
If we were to either do that, like, let's talk about number one. I'm sure the reason the decision was made was because it's like a service to school families, but it also has to be fair because the families are paying. Not everybody can afford to pay for it, and the district is subsidizing the energy use, I guess. But
Well, and typically, if you did charge them, they would just increase the price to
right, which is the issue,
the
which we
people who
wouldn't.
are using it. So,
Yeah.
So that's kind of why I said, okay, I
But
guess.
we're not being
the logic-
consistent. I'm sorry. I'm not
Well, Emily,
talking-
let's not talk about
Yeah.
it now.
Yeah,
I think
no,
this
yeah,
is like
yeah.
a big
Yes.
picture conversation we
this-
have to
this-
have.
We
Yeah.
need to continue this conversation, but I think this conversation needs to be continued prior to the budget season. Because
Yeah.
if we are going to make a decision to include facilities usage for all our organizations, I think that needs to be a bigger picture discussion and agreement from the board for budgeting purposes.
Yeah. So let's table this to the next meeting, Kathy, and we have to talk about kind of holistically how we want to approach this. But I think, for me personally, I would love to see more options and more of an expansion. Because I think it's beneficial to our users, to our families, but we have to do it in a consistent and equitable way. Lowercase equitable. So in any case, we are over time, but I do want to open to, I'm going to actually open to board comments. Please, guys, only if you have something that you really have to say.
There's far too much. You covered so much ground today. I think we should just hold it for the evening board meetings because there are like 15 topics here.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Rachel. Okay, so we have 6 people left in the attendee from the community. If anybody has anything to say, now would be the opportunity. First of all, we're opening to community comments. Not seeing any hands from the community. Going once, going twice. Okay, so thank you everybody for bearing with
Adam,
us
I'd like
for this.
Adam,
Yeah.
I'd like to make a motion, if you're done with this meeting, I'd like to make a motion that we go into executive session to discuss a health and safety matter. Can
Oh,
somebody?
I'm sorry, we just do have a hand. Do you mind if I give them?
Oh,
that?
no, go right ahead. Yeah, can you
Okay.
stop sharing the screen? Because I can't see and then I won't know who's seconding my motion.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Miss Marino, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
I think I'm unmuted, am I?
Yes, you are.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to take a minute to wish you all a happy holiday season, a Merry Christmas to anyone who's celebrating, and a Happy New Year. And that's all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Merry
We really
Christmas.
appreciate that.
Thank you, Regina.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Emily, I second your motion.
Thank you. All in favor of, can I just have the board that come on, all in favor? Okay, thank you, board. We can end this meeting and we will go into executive session.